Hello again, and thank you for tuning into my latest video. Gordon Causey, as it always is, I will be uploading this on Tuesday, the 13th of May, 2025. And if you like the content that I'm putting out, I will invite you, as I always do, as all YouTubers do, to hit that like button, to subscribe, and take note that if you want to be notified when new content is uploaded, or if I'm doing a live, which I do frequently, then you will need to hit the notification bell. There's a little bell down there somewhere. You click on that, and then you have to hit all notifications, and then you'll know when there's new content that's been put on, and you'll also be notified when I'm doing a live stream. And I enjoy those because it's live and interactive, totally unscripted, which is what I'm doing now. I'm just talking off the cuff right now. But I'm going to get into this topic of whether or not is Canada becoming Islamic in nature? Are we becoming an Islamic country? Uh, and this is something that I've scripted out. This is something I wrote out because it's very long and very involved and very nuanced. And as always, I invite you to fill up the comment field. When controversial topics are brought up, uh, quite often it spurs a lot of dialogue, and I think that's healthy. I like to see all perspectives represented. So without any further ado, I will share with you what I wrote. And the title, if you like, is Canada at Risk of Becoming an Islamic Country? And I know I'm stepping in it again. It's what I do. There are important issues that Canadians should be discussing, but all too often people are afraid to give voice to the thoughts that they're having in their head. They're thinking these things, but they're afraid of being attacked or labeled with some pejorative slur, being called a transphobe, an Islamophobe, a homophobe. And that's just, moronic virtue signaling by the mindless horde. If you haven't figured it out by now, that kind of thing, I don't care about it. You want to call me names? Go ahead, fill your boots. If we're going to talk about important issues, you have to be willing to risk offending people and you got to be willing to risk being offended yourself. So if you're up for it, hey, put on your big boy pants and let's go. If virtue signaling was an Olympic sport, I think Canadians would own the podium. We dominate. People are afraid to discuss things like Islam because they don't want to be labeled as racist for some stupid reason. Obviously, Islam is not a race, it is a religion. And broadly speaking, nobody has an issue with criticizing religion so long as it's Christianity that we're putting under the microscope. Then it's okay. First and foremost, I am not looking actually to criticize Islam. Rather, I want to examine it. Many, and maybe most, will know that I am a professing Christian, and one of Jesus's exhortations in the Bible, he told his followers to examine the log in your own eye before pointing out the speck in someone else's eye. And many of the challenges and criticisms about Islam, I keep saying Islam, such as treatment of women, these are challenges and criticisms that Christians have also faced. I mean, in Canada, it wasn't until 1918 that women were granted the right to vote in our federal elections, and that was 2 years after the province of Manitoba had become the first Canadian province to allow women to vote in provincial elections. But then you look at Quebec, which at that time was I would call it a hyper-religious society, uh, largely controlled by the Roman Catholic Church. They were the last to allow women to vote. The women in Quebec didn't get to vote in provincial elections until 1940. Now, of course, a lot of this history is simply forgotten. We assume just automatically that, the way things are now, that this is the way it's always been. But obviously not. If you know your history, you know that's not the case. But Within the Islamic faith, there are elements that do not share these values of equality. Head coverings, for example, you have the burqa or you have the niqab, the hijab, and in some cases, full body coverings. Many will know it's called the burqa. Uh, in some elements of the Islamic community, that's a social expectation. The horrific practice of so-called honor killings made a lot of news probably 15, 20 years ago or so. But now that's pretty much faded from the news. But I openly wonder whether things have improved significantly, or is it just that is that still happening, but it's not being reported on in the same fashion as in years past because we're sensitive. We don't want to be appear to be criticizing the Islamic faith. That's just an open question. Um, Canada, we all know this, is a nation of immigrants. It goes without saying, as far as I'm concerned. Europeans first started arriving in significant numbers in what we now call Canada. That would have been back in the early 1600s. And from my read of history, the native population, for the most part, they were incredibly welcoming. The newcomers were small in number, they offered opportunity, increased trade, brought wealth to Canada's First Nations peoples, gave them access to technologies that were beyond their reach back then technologically. And the First Nations peoples living in Canada were often at war with one another. And so they sought alliances with the French, with the British, with these European newcomers in order to defeat other First Nations peoples because there was a lot of hostility. I don't want to go too deep down this rabbit hole about early Native North American culture pre and around the time of colonization because my knowledge is not that extensive. I'm not a scholar in this particular field. I know broad strokes, but I believe that I'm on fairly safe ground in asserting that by the time Canada's First Nations recognized the threat that European colonists and their descendants posed to Native culture and their way of life, by the time they realized it, it was too late to fight back. If we look down in the United States, the First Nations started to band together in an effort to assert Native land rights and protect culture for peoples like the Lakota, the Sioux, the Comanche, Apache. But it was too late. The die was cast. It was a losing battle. Borrowing further from our American neighbors, the first British colonies established in what is now the United States, they were, again, like in Canada, early 1600s. And then Custer's last stand, the Battle of the Little Bighorn. And that's considered, I know, by many to kind of be the last gasp of Native North American First Nations attempt to maintain their sovereignty, for lack of a better word. But that was 200 years after Europeans first started arriving in 1870. The Battle of Little Bighorn was in 1876. So almost 300 years had gone by. And so I think it can be reasonably argued that European colonization of North America represented something of a Trojan horse, albeit, granted, a very slow-moving Trojan horse. Didn't happen like that famous story from Troy. So the question that I guess I'm asking here is whether or not Islamic immigration will represent the same kind of threat to our current way of life, to our culture, and more broadly speaking, Western democratic values. And a secondary question is whether things might move faster in our current age than they did hundreds of years ago. Back in the 1600s, if you were emigrating to the New World, that meant a harrowing ocean crossing. It would typically take over a month, depending on weather, currents, wind conditions. Heck, it could take more than 2 months. The Mayflower crossing, I checked on this, it took 66 days, more than 2 months. Now, with air travel, that same Atlantic crossing is done in a few hours. 5, 6, 7 hours, depending which direction you're going. And those coming to the New World aren't facing the privations that Europeans were facing. It's no more pioneering now, no sir. Uh, I wonder if we took a European settler who came over, a European pioneer who broke the land, built his house, lugged water, did all those things, had to face disease and hunger, back-breaking labor to establish a new way of life in this new world. If we took someone like that and transported him back forward, not back, but forward in time to the present day, I wonder if he'd look back and go, what the heck was I thinking? Why did I do all that? And, if we look back, if anthropologists are correct in their theory about the Bering Strait, the land bridge, when, the first ancestors of Nor Native North Americans came across, they might feel the same way about the Europeans who came over by boat. Geez, we had to walk all the way over from Asia. We could have just waited and built a boat, but I'm digressing. That's what I do. Uh, Suffice to say, I do not think Canada becoming an Islamic state represents a clear and present danger. I don't think it's, everyone likes this word existential, as in, it's right in front of us. It's not staring us directly in the face, threatening to take over the broader culture in, another year or two or three. But I don't think we're looking at centuries either. It depends on things like immigration and fertility rates. But I think we could be talking about 10 to 20 years. And as I've said many times, I live in small rural Ontario. I'm about 150 kilometers off my shoulder there, 150 kilometers from the big smoke of Toronto. There are more apple trees than people in my town. I'm sure of that. And yet, my little town now has halal foods on the shelves in grocery stores. And if you're unaware of what halal means, many Muslims they follow dietary restrictions, like meats, for example, have to be killed in a certain ritualistic fashion. It's similar to the way the rules that exist in Judaism with regard to food being kosher. And I think they also have to be blessed by an Islamic cleric or something along those lines. But, ultimately, Canadians were welcoming. I honestly think that is something of a default position of human nature. We're welcoming. So long as we see people coming in and we don't feel threatened, we welcome the stranger. Like that large wooden horse the people of Troy welcomed into their city. We seek out exchange, we seek out trade, we assume the best. Uh, in the past 25 or so years, the number of Canadians, though, who identify as Muslim has tripled. In 2001, these are StatsCan numbers. The number of people living in Canada who identified as Muslim was in and around 600,000. Fast forward 20 years to 2021, and that had grown to nearly 1.8 million, which represents about 5% of the Canadian total population. And the fertility rate amongst Islamic Canadians is reported to be about 2.4 births per woman during her childbearing years. That's in the Islamic community. In Canada writ large, the broader Canadian landscape, our fertility rate is only 1.33. And if you're unaware, for a population to maintain itself steady and not, just maintain the status quo, you need a birth rate, or rather a fertility rate of 2.1. That means women on average during their childbirthing years have on average 2.1 children, and then the population stays steady. But Canada, as a nation, we're at 1.33. So without immigration, our population would be in decline. And the Islamic community, according to Stats Can, their birth rate or their fertility rate, they're expressed differently. Fertility rate in the Islamic community is 2.4. So more than enough to maintain, but it actually grows the population. Uh, so I ask, if these trends continue, what will Canada look like in 10 years or in 20, 25? Like pretty much all Canadians, I think most Canadians are in favor of immigration. It's part of our identity, and it's part of our culture and heritage. England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales. I am not a native First Nations Canadian. My ancestors came over here. But I am also here to say you can have too much of a good thing. And I think this fact is understood by many people who are more recently becoming Canadians, people who haven't been here for, two, three, four or more generations. I think even newer Canadians recognize that too much immigration can be a bad thing. Uh, there is nothing inherently racist or intolerant about wanting Canada's immigration policy to be measured. It takes time for new communities to integrate uh, and to contribute to the broader culture. But history, and I consider myself something of an amateur historian, and history is often a tale of numbers. And when it's too many over a sustained period of time, the need and even the desire to assimilate and integrate, why bother? We're the dominant group. Did the Europeans coming over to the North, the New World, to North America, did they integrate to a degree early on? There was some integration. We have the Métis population here in Canada. The French had their coureurs de bois who were going and were kind of the forerunners to that Métis population. But again, I'm digressing. Um, just I- if we keep allowing massive levels of immigration to come in, is there going to be a need or even a desire to assimilate? And I would say it might be wise to ask Canada's First Nations peoples, what was their experience? And ultimately, maybe there's nothing we can do about it after all. By the time North America's original inhabitants recognized the threat that their culture and way of life was facing, it was already too late. And maybe it's too late for us as well. Anyway, thanks for watching. Again, I invite your comments, your thoughts, your views, opinions. I love synonyms, obviously. Share them down below. And again, you're welcome to hit like, share, subscribe, do all of the above. Always appreciate the engagement. And I'll be doing my next live. The intention is to do a live video on Wednesday. So if you're up for that and you want to, talk live and interactive via the live chat feature, I welcome it and we'll see you all soon. Thanks for tuning in.